Yo, what's going on, people? It's your boy Huncho, and this is the untold UK rap tale of rapper Trouble.
Niggas know how to ting out. Niggas know how to ting side. Wheels out, chair grinding. You was cooling at home with this so-called princess.
So you might be asking yourself, if his name is Trouble, then why is the title of the video called The Rubberband Man? Well, before we get into Trouble starting his music career and becoming one of the most anticipated artists to come out of the East Midlands, more specifically Leicester, in May of 2008, Theodore Paget, aka Trouble, was on holiday in Marmaris, Turkey. Reportedly to be high off drugs and drink at the time, he would get into a 4-hour argument with his girlfriend Chantal in the hotel room at the Blue Bay Deluxe Hotel, and after making his way towards the balcony, he then plunged 40 foot or 2 stories to his potential death. When he touched the floor, he landed on his back, but instantly sprang back onto his feet and had ran off. At this time, it was said that friends and security had begun a frantic search for him, and 2 hours later, Trouble then walked back into the hotel lobby, complaining he had a pain in his back. He was taken to hospital, where a scan had revealed that he had a fracture in his lower spine. Stunned doctors had declared later that he should have died from the fall, and they labelled him the Rubberband Man after his lucky escape from death. The day after the incident, he went on to tell reporters, "The doctors were amazed that I lived to tell the tale. They said I was like a rubber band and just bounced. I was so lucky." When he arrived at the hospital, doctors swiftly realised that he was drunk and his urine tested positive for cocaine and cannabis, and then the insurers had refused to pay for his treatment and he had to discharge himself from his intensive care bed after 2 days in hospital. Although his insurers didn't pay for treatment, doctors wanted him flown home on a stretcher, but of course because they didn't pay, he had to make do with a back brace and a wheelchair. Recounting the events, Trouble would go on to say that he felt dizzy on the balcony before his horrific fall earlier on that morning. He added, "I remember hitting the ground and lying there a minute to catch my breath. Then everyone started crowding round, so I jumped up and ran off." Hotel guest Rachel Gregory from Doncaster said, "I could hear a girl screaming. We looked out and we could see this lad lying on the concrete floor below. At first he didn't move and I thought he was dead. He looked all twisted up, but then he just jumped back up and ran off into the night." So now you know why Trouble is called the Rubberband Man, and of course he survived, hence why I'm making this story about him. But first, let's go back 3 years prior to that incident, to April 2nd, 2005. When Trouble was 18, he would see himself get caught up in some charges when he was accused of setting up an ambush in where lung cancer sufferer James Bushan had been beaten up by a gang of youths. In August of 2006, a 2-day trial would take place at Nottingham Crown Court, where Trouble of course denied the charges brought against him. In that short trial, it was heard that a near miss between James's Land Rover and a moped driven by Theodore Paget, aka Trouble, had sparked a confrontation between the pair on that afternoon on April the 2nd, 2005. James had parked the car, and before entering his home, he had confronted Theodore, and in his own words, he wanted to find out what on earth he'd been playing at. It was then claimed that Trouble had stuck 2 fingers up at him and started shouting abuse before riding off. Michael Arty, prosecuting, said the abuse concluded with this chilling remark, "You want drama? I'll give you drama." However, the court was also told that Theodore said he wanted to avoid trouble, no pun intended. Trouble had told police that he said to James, "Do you want the stress? Because I don't want the stress. Really, I don't want it." And following that first dispute, James had then returned outside, where he found Trouble by his moped, and a second confrontation followed in which a fight had broken out between the two and they fell to the ground. Whilst the two were on the floor, a number of youths had arrived at the scene in a car and allegedly had joined in, aiming strikes at James's head and ribs. Trouble had denied that he had set the attack up, saying he went back to apologise to James for the earlier dispute and he hadn't intended for anyone to follow him there. It was heard in court that James had been returning from hospital on the day where he had found out he only had literally months left to live. A jury at Nottingham Crown Court took just over 4 hours to find Trouble not guilty of assault occasioning actual bodily harm on James, and it was reported that James had sadly died from cancer only 3 months after the incident. Years later, Theodore would emerge on the rap scene, where he would go by the alias Trouble 3.4, and in November of 2012 he would go on to release a remix of Meek Mill's Lean With It called Roll With It, which was a single for his upcoming mixtape TDF Volume 1 with the group which he was a part of called Fam Figures, which was due to be released on the 12th of December 2012. The group had put music out onto the channel before Trouble was on there, but for the sake of the video, we're only going to go from when Trouble had made a debut on the channel. And with that being said, the group would then go on to release 2 videos for their mixtape with songs Caught in This Trap and Ticklish. Trouble would also go on to release his song Trouble's Coming on the channel as well. After the release of the mixtape and the music videos, for unknown reasons, the channel and the group would go quiet. In 2020, years later, Caught in This Trap would be the last video ever uploaded on there, which was one of the videos from the mixtape. Trouble would pop back up in the summer of 2013 though, where he would go on to release Real Shit featuring A-Rex, which didn't really gain any kind of relevant views. So after this, things go quiet, and to my best knowledge, music-wise, nothing was put out, and if it was, it never really made any noise. But that all changed in 2016.
They have blown us all away in truth. Premier League champions 2016, the amazing Leicester City!
Ah yes, the 2015-2016 season of the Premier League where the unimaginable came true, and if you had put a £1 bet on Leicester to win the league, then you would have just bagged yourself a £5,000 investment, or if you was this lucky fan, you would have just cashed out on 250 grand. What a great season it was for the Foxes that year. All around, every football fan had rooted for them to win, and they became everyone's favourite team, second to their own. Unless you were the bookies, where that year they had to pay out the most they've ever had to, marking Leicester winning the league is the most damaging loss ever to the bookies, where they had to pay out a record £25 million. That season, you have to admit, the players that they had really had cemented Leicester's name as a Premier League side to be put up there with the greats. Now, one standout player that year has to be Jamie Vardy. Jamie Vardy was on form that year and still to this day holds the title of most consecutive goals scored in the Premier League, that being 11 matches, which was previously held by Man United's Ruud van Nistelrooy, which was 10 matches, and he held that title for 12 years before Jamie Vardy had burst through the scene and took that record off him. And it should be noted that in 2019, Jamie Vardy went on to break his own record by scoring in 16 consecutive matches, absolutely smashing his previous record back in 2016. Along with Jamie Vardy's top form also came the meme "Chat Shit Get Banged," which seems to have originated from Vardy posting it on his Facebook status in 2011. Once some football fans had caught onto this, it quickly blew up into a meme worldwide, with everyone saying "Chat Shit Get Banged" to pretty much anything and everything. So this is where Trouble did a very smart thing. After being quiet for many years musically and seeing the success of his hometown team in the Premier League, with people naturally looking at Leicester, even musically, Trouble would capitalise off this, and seeing as he's a Leicester native, he would go on to released the song Chat Shit Get Banged on Link Up TV on the 25th of January 2016, which currently sits on 121k views, and he also at this point dropped the 3.4 from his name and would go by the name Trouble. While Trouble had released this song, he had also had his debut mixtape ready for the streets titled 10, which was to release on the 10th of April 2016. Before this though, he released a freestyle on Link Up TV on the 3rd of February 2016, and I want you guys to pay attention to the guy on the left because he's going to be involved later on in the video. Then on the 22nd of February 2016, he would go on to release How the Ting Set, and then on the 10th, the mixtape featuring Jay Spades, Jay Avalanche and Charlie Drew would drop, followed by single 3-5, which featured on the mixtape.
Don't shot no 3-5. Square come like 3-5. Strap cost like 3-5. Bear call no green guy. My through B-Town.
On the 11th of April 2016, Complex would even go on to write an article about him titled "Trouble is about to put Leicester rap on the map with his 10 mixtape." In the article, he would go on to say that the Leicester scene was building and artists were making a bit of a noise, but he felt like he was going to take it to another level, and would go on to recount his friend telling him about the phrase "chat shit get banged," and went on to say, "My friend said, bro, have you heard about chat shit get banged?" And I was like, "No, what's that about?" And he went on to say that his friend had clued him up about what was going on, and then they hit the studio to make the track. He would add that the music he raps isn't grime, it's gangster rap, claiming it's a mix of trap with a grime flow, but would put it into the trap category if he had to. He also went on to say that he wanted to get out there more and network with the right people, but music was his priority, with him wanting to release a new mixtape within the next 4 months, which would have made it August of 2016. but that would never happen. Although the video for Jungle would release on the 5th of June 2016 and a P110 freestyle would release on the 29th of July 2016, exactly 4 weeks after his 10 mixtape dropped, on the 8th of May 2016, Trouble would see himself caught up with the law, facing life in jail. So what happened? Well, on the 8th of May 2016, Trouble would attend a Sub 10 nightclub in King Street, Leicester. After being escorted out of the club's basement at around 6 AM, he became furious and had got into an argument with several people outside the club before producing a handgun from his waistband, and he held it to the face of doorman Ricky Baxter. Doorman Dan Lewis had stepped in to protect his colleague and disarm Trouble, at which point he was shot in the groin. Trouble was to stand on trial over the incident in July of 2017, and the events of what happened were explained to the court. Trouble would plead guilty to owning the Baikal semi-automatic self-loading pistol and would plead guilty with intent to cause violence to the first doorman and pleaded guilty to unlawfully wounding Dan Lewis, but had denied the more serious charge of wounding with intent. Given evidence in court for the prosecution during the trial, Dan Lewis would go on to say that Trouble was very irate after being ejected from the nightclub, and CCTV footage which was played in court showed him falling on top of Trouble, and it was clear to see that Dan was in agony outside the club. Dan went on to say, "As I tried to restrain Theo, aka Trouble, I heard a bang and saw smoke rise up. The smoke came from the firearm from my stomach area. I felt a large sharp shooting pain in my groin and my left leg." He denied this suggestion made by Trouble's barrister, Satnayan Berial, that the gun only went off accidentally when they both fell on the ground. The defense lawyer went on to say, "There's no criticism of you, Mr. Lewis, and Mr. Paget admits he had the gun in his possession that caused the injury to you. He admits causing your injury and apologizes unreservedly for it. This was a shocking and fast-moving event." However, he went on to suggest that the gun had discharged as he collapsed onto Theodore Paget, aka Trouble. Dan Lewis disagreed, saying he was standing grappling with Trouble at the time of the shooting, and the court was then told about Trouble being escorted from the nightclub's basement known as the Dungeon before the shooting. Dan Lewis went on to say that Trouble then began arguing with Ricky Baxter, who refused to let him back in, saying, "You don't know who I am," before producing the gun in a cloth. He added, "He put the gun to Ricky's face, to his mouth. All I could see was the tip of the muzzle. The firearm was at arm's length, touching his mouth. I punched Theodore to the right side of his face and it made him stumble. I grabbed him around his shirt from behind and he tried breaking free, just wiggling. I got him in a bear hug, dragging him backwards away from the club. Another doorman, Robert Jones, got involved and Ricky struck him as well. Theodore then turned sideways." Dan Lewis then went on to say that Trouble had went on to shoot him before they fell to the ground. At a later court date, Trouble would give evidence in defense where he told the court that he was a music producer known as Anton from Kirby Frith, where he had grown up, and claimed he was in the club for about half an hour in the basement known as the Dungeon, as we previously stated, when he was in an altercation with an unknown Jamaican man who dropped the handgun. He then said that he picked it up, not fully appreciating at that stage what it was, although it felt like a gun inside the stock. He then said he put it in his own waistband. Trouble claimed he'd received a death threat in 2013, which the police were aware of, and he kept the weapon rather than handing it to the doorman because he feared for his own safety. Under cross-examination by prosecutor Andrew Haworth, Trouble denied the suggestion he took the gun to the scene or that he deliberately shot Dan Lewis, who held him in the tight bear hug. The prosecution went on to say, "Why didn't you tell the doorman you had got a gun from the Jamaican man?" And he went on to say, "I wanted to keep it for myself. I was scared something may happen. I wasn't thinking clearly. I had alcohol that night, about 7 vodkas with cola, and it could have clouded my judgment. Clearly I wasn't thinking straight." He went on to say that insults were exchanged with the first doorman on the door, and then he produced the gun, adding, "I meant the doorman to feel scared and stupid and small like I felt because they were belittling me. I know what I did was reckless and stupid." The prosecution went on to say, "Your barrister described you as a minor celebrity in the music and fashion industry and you thought you deserved more respect," with Trouble responding, "Yes." The prosecution went on to say, "You wanted to scare him," talking about the first doorman, "to make him believe he was going to get shot in the face," and Trouble went on to reply, "Yes." Trouble would then go on to describe the struggle and trying to wriggle free from Dan Lewis as we previously spoken about, and he would demonstrate to the jury how the gun was pointing down and slightly away from his right leg as he went to the ground. Trouble went on to say, "I have no knowledge of firearms. I lost control of the gun. He fell on top of me. He's a big man and I'm only 9 stone. He rolled over and I heard it go off and I heard him scream." And then he later added, "It was a muffled bang." The prosecution suggested if he did not deliberately shoot Dan Lewis when they were standing up, the alternative scenario was that when they fell. He went on to say, "You deliberately put the gun behind you and fired it," and Trouble replied, "No, I did not intend to shoot him. I didn't want to shoot that man. I don't know how it was done. I could have shot myself." The prosecution accused Trouble of trying to shoot Dan a second time because an unused and faulty bullet, which was ejected from the same handgun, was recovered from the crime scene. Trouble went on to deny this allegation, saying he did not know where the second bullet had come from. Regarding the bullet that was discharged, it was said that it went through Dan's left testicle and thigh, and the bullet was never recovered. In court, it was described that Trouble had become very emotional, nearly on the verge of tears, as he described the shooting as traumatic. After the incident, it was told to the court that Trouble's friend had intervened, which made him get away. He then picked up the gun and made off with his friends along New Walk, where he then discarded the firearm inside the sock and put it under rubbish in a car park off Conduit Street. The prosecution said if he had no knowledge of firearms, how was the gun found with the safety catch on when police recovered it when no one had touched it since Theodore Paget had been there? And Trouble replied, I can't explain how the catch came to be on the safety position when the police found it. Then on the 11th of July 2017, a jury of 6 men and 6 women found him unanimously guilty of all charges brought against him. Judge Philip Head said the jury's verdict led him to an inescapable conclusion that Theodore Paget, aka Trouble, had deliberately pulled the trigger and that the shooting was not an accident. He said there was an intention of pulling the trigger to escape from doormen trying to restrain and disarm him. And to Trouble's claims that he had got the gun from inside the club shortly before the shooting, the judge went on to say, I'm disposed to sentence him on the basis it was his gun and he brought it to the club. On the face of the evidence, it appears he was familiar with the gun because, as we know, the safety catch was on when the police recovered it, which demonstrated he had worked it after the incident and before he deposited it. Dan Lewis would go on to say this after the verdict was given.
Theodore Paget was found guilty today of wounding Dan Lewis with intent to inflict serious harm upon him, and the judge said that it meant that he deliberately pulled the trigger, and he will be sentencing on Thursday. Now, Dan, can you tell me what happened?
Yeah, I was working as a doorman at the club, and then next thing I know, an altercation broke out between Paget and one of the door colleagues. And next thing I know, he'd pulled a gun and put it to his face.
And what did you do?
I then shook Mr. Paget, and then a fight broke out, which ended up with me being shot.
You heard a bang? What happened?
Yeah, dragged Mr. Paget into the middle of the road, and then seconds later there was a loud bang. Puff of smoke came from my stomach area, and then I hit the floor in excruciating pain, screaming, I've been shot.
How long did it take you to recover? What exactly happened?
I was then taken to hospital. I was in hospital for 24 hours on observation. I was then off work for 3 months, and I still haven't returned to the doors since.
And you've attended the trial, and you saw Theodore Paget found guilty of wounding you with intent. Now, he'd admitted pulling the trigger, but said it was an accident. Was it an accident? No,
I think he intended to shoot me the whole time, just to get away. His initial intention was to pull the gun, cause fear to one of my colleagues, and then make a runner, but then I've stopped him by doing that, by hitting him and grabbing him. So the only way I could get away was by shooting me.
Now, he said that he took the gun off someone else in the club, but the judge said he's going to sentence him on Thursday on the basis that he took it to the club. And do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree completely. I think he had the gun with him the whole time. I think the whole story of taking the gun off someone else is just that story that he's made up to try and get away with it.
Now, the strange thing was, there was another bullet that misfired that was found at the scene. The judge said actually he tried to shoot you twice.
Yeah, he shot me in the original altercation, and then as I've hit the floor and let go of Mr. Paget, as he's got up, you can see him trying to reload the firearm and then possibly shoot me again.
What do you think about the man that deliberately shot you?
I feel sorry for the man. Whatever his upbringing is or whatever his reasons are for it, there's no need for it. And hopefully he's going to serve a hefty sentence, sort his life out, come out a changed man.
Now, if the bullet had struck somewhere else, anything could have happened. How lucky do you actually feel to be alive today?
Oh, I'm very lucky, very, very lucky that it hit where it did and it caused what damage it did. I'm left with no real lifelong injuries apart from numbness in my leg, but I can still walk, I can still see my kids, still go home to my wife every day, so I'm a very, very lucky person.
Then, on the 13th of July 2017, Theodore Paget, aka Trouble, would appear in court for his sentencing hearing, and the judge would hand him a 20-year jail sentence. Imposing the 20-year sentence with an additional 5-year extension to Theodore Paget's licence, Judge Philip Head said, "The facts of this case and your record make me sure you're someone with a short temper, particularly when you're drunk, as you often are when offending. You have an exaggerated regard for your own significance. You were telling people, 'Do you know who I am? I'm Anton from Kirby Frith.' During the trial, your barrister described you as a minor celebrity in the local music and fashion industry, and you felt belittled by door staff who failed to acknowledge your status, and you said you wanted them to feel scared, belittled, and small. You were quick to resort to violence with a weapon to protect your fragile ego. You pointed that gun, a loaded lethal weapon, with intent to cause fear. It was a Baikal semi-automatic self-loading pistol. Your conviction meant the jury was sure your account was false about how you acquired the weapon, how it was discharged, and in relation to the misfired bullet at the scene. It may be you had the weapon partly due to an incident in 2013 when the police warned you your life was in danger, or you had other reasons, I can't be sure. You drunk no less than 10 vodkas as you told a doctor, and not 7 vodkas as you told the jury. Before 6 AM, you got involved in an argument with another man in the club. You were violent and told to leave. You were deeply aggrieved and warned a doorman that things would pop off. You were refused re-entry and was laughed at and called some names by door staff in front of your friends. You withdrew the loaded gun and thrust it, making contact with the face of Mr. Baxter, a doorman. Mr. Lewis reacted entirely properly by punching you in the face. During a struggle, you deliberately fired the gun at very close range at him to get him to release you. Mercifully, his injuries were not serious. In regards to the misfired bullet, the judge went on to say, "This is another example of really serious early hours street violence outside a pub or club fueled by alcohol. Mr. Lewis was serving the public, seeking to maintain order. Your arrogance and false regard for your status blinded you to any consideration for others. You produced the gun for revenge and intimidation." And Dan Lewis would go on to say this after the sentencing.
I think it's a fair sentence, higher than I was expecting, but I think it's a fair sentence for what the judge has explained and what the judge felt that he had done. I think it's a fair sentence.
Now, you had to have 3 months off work, and you even ended up selling your fishing tackle, and, you know, because it was hard to make ends meet with 2 children and a wife. Was it difficult?
Yeah, very. I was off for 3 months from work. I gave up the doors completely, so I lost a complete income there. I had to claim benefits for 3 months. Bills were getting on top of me, so my only hobby was fishing, but I did have to sell all my fishing gear to then make ends meet and pay the bills.
Now, we heard that you physically made a really good recovery, but it has had an emotional effect upon you, hasn't it? That was mentioned in court.
Yeah, physically I'm near enough there now, apart from numbness in my leg, but emotionally this will stay with me for many, many years to come. Many, many years to come.
And you're never going to go back to the doors?
No, it's an industry I've been involved in for 13 years, but I'll never ever go back on the doors now.
Now, the judge praised you today for your bravery and courage. In fact, he gave you a public commendation and awarded you £500 from public funds to actually mark your bravery in stepping up without hesitating to protect your colleagues and other members of the public. How do you feel about that?
I'm really happy, overwhelmed. I'd like to think that anyone in my position would have done exactly the same. I don't think I'm no hero. I think I'll just do my job, looking after my mates and doing what anyone else would have done, hopefully.
And now that you've seen the man that shot you deliberately being sentenced to imprisonment, he said that he would like to meet you personally to apologise under the restorative justice system. How do you feel about that?
If it's going to help him heal and turn into a better person, I will happily meet him. Happily meet him, sit down, have a chat, get your side of it.
And can you draw a line under this and move on? What does the future hold for you now?
Hopefully now, after this today, I'll get a bit of closure and move on with my family and start looking forward to life.
Almost a year later, on the 16th of March 2018, Trouble would go for his appeal to see if he could get time taken off what was handed to him, and his appeal was dismissed. In London's courts of appeals, it was heard that his lawyers challenged the length of the sentence because of the facts of the shooting, and that the judge had failed to give him credit for pleading guilty and for his remorse. But rejecting the appeal, Mr. Justice Goose said the injuries Theo caused were a serious example of a wounding case. He went on to say the circumstances demonstrated at present and continuing significant risk to members of the public of serious harm. He had armed himself with a prohibited weapon with live ammunition. He had it in his clothing and had taken it out into a nightclub. He was clearly willing to fire it. This demonstrated that he is a highly dangerous man. So that wraps up Trouble's case. Now, remember when I said earlier on in the video to keep an eye out for the guy on the left in that freestyle video? Whoa, in January of 2017, the man in the video, named Shannon Riley, was arrested after being seen taking part in a drugs exchange. Him, alongside Ezra Sterling, were under investigation by officers from the East Midlands Special Operations, the regional police team which goes after high-profile criminals and organised crime gangs. Leicestershire police said that Shannon, along with Ezra, were in a silver Ford Focus which was parked in Leicester where the exchange had took place. When police moved in, the pair drove off, and as they travelled over a bridge across the River Soar in Leicester, Shannon had proceeded to throw a plastic bag for life into the water below. After the bag was recovered by police, they found it to contain just over a kilo of cocaine valued at £45,000, and once cut, could be worth many times more. Both men were arrested the following month, and officers recovered a number of quote-unquote dealer's bags from Ezra's home. In court, Shannon had pleaded guilty to possession with intent to supply Class A drugs, and Ezra pleaded guilty to be concerned in the supply of Class B drugs and assisting an offender. And in August of 2017, in sentencing, Shannon was given a 5-year and 8-month jail sentence, and Ezra was handed a 12-month suspended sentence and 100 hours unpaid work. And that is the untold UK rap tale of UK rapper Trouble. Now, for you guys that did want to know, Trouble will be eligible for parole on the 9th of July 2032. Now, what's interesting about Trouble's case is he really was starting to come up, and I really do think he would have had big things coming his way had he not been handed this jail sentence. We've seen it with so many rappers that have been jailed before. They're literally on the verge of becoming these massive things, and then they end up doing long jail sentences. But let me know what you guys think of this in the comment section below. Give the video a little like, and if you want the latest drill, street and music news out of the UK, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. It's been your boy Huncho, and I'm out.